The paper looks at AI from the perspective of what it means for the literary, more specifically for the essay, which is what I've been working on recently. The title of a widely debated article by Stephen March, published in December 2022 in The Atlantic, presents one view of the effect of AI on the essay. The college essay is dead. Lamenting the inability of the humanities to remain relevant in a ruthlessly competitive academic landscape, March speculates that generative AI tools will make the essay, traditionally a centerpiece of an education in the humanities, obsolete. Many disagree, citing the factual inaccuracy of AI generators or their tendency to hallucinate. Others focus on developing computational tools for the detection of AI in students' essays, thus turning the issue into primarily a matter of policing, ironically resorting to AI to detect its own presence. Others approach the debate from ethical and political perspectives, to critique the neoliberal university or to broach discussions about proprietary rights and the ethics of plagiarism, data harvesting, and open source. These issues deserve attention, of course, perhaps more than is afforded to them in a current moment, sometimes characterized by a nuanced triumphalism in the adoption of AI technologies that promise not only acceleration in process of production, more augmentation in scale of processing, and relief from the drudgery of work, but also the extension of human imagination and creativity. However, my scope will be significantly narrower, and what follows will have to necessarily bracket extensive scholarship in essay studies, posthumanism, machine learning, electronic literature, philosophy, and also literary studies. My first move is to remove the college essay and the academic essay from the conversation. The question, what is an essay, might seem quite straightforward, but it is actually highly contentious, because the forms of writing that have been called essay are notoriously heterogeneous, and it is impossible to identify the generic criteria that essay scholars or essayists would agree are essential to the essay. One such form is the highly formulaic contemporary academic essay that finds its origins in the rhetorical tradition of the essay, and that prioritizes the reproduction of knowledge, the handling of formal and authoritative styles, the rational sequencing and structuring of the material, and the drive towards the construction of a persuasive argument. I talk instead of different kinds of essay, which embody more strongly what has been called the spirit of the essay. More precisely, I talk less about the essay as a genre than about the essayistic as a mode, a stance, an attitude, or an approach. In this context, the essayistic would refer to the experimental, the tentative, and the future-oriented impetus suggested by the etymological roots of essay, essayer, or to try, to experiment, as used by Michel de Montaigne in his essay, the first book of essays that think of themselves as essays by the first essayist to think of himself as an essayist. Countless essayists and critics have tried to describe this elusive quality. Indeed, as Claire Deobaldi observes, the genre is in fact defined predominantly in terms of the mode, rather than of specific formal characteristics. Mark Benz, for example, claims that the essay is an experimental method. Michael Hall describes the essayistic as the spirit of exploration, the spirit of skeptical inquiry, daring experimentation, and ironic play. Thomas Harrison synthesizes such claims by describing the essay as continuously unfurling inquiry, striving always for something it has not quite said, continually reshaping its forms and methods, rethinking its suppositions. The essay, he writes, is partially experimental and ultimately inconclusive, striving for a still unachievable goal. It is an idea that takes us a step further along, a rejection of fixed, established, and authoritative literary method. J.K. Chesterton says it beautifully. The essay is full of the future and the praise of experiment and adventure. It does not know what it is trying to find, and therefore does not find it. Here, we start to suspect that the experimental and tentative aspects of the essayistic mean that when trying to define the essay as a genre, we encounter a paradox. If the essayistic is defined in terms of the stretching of limits, the more resistant to genre an essay is, the more essayistic it is. At this point, The motivation behind the angle I'm adopting in the discussion of AI and the essayistic can be stated a bit more clearly. What if we considered the essayistic as a limit case, a point of tension or crisis in AI writing as currently conceived? And to dig deeper in this point of tension, what would the AI essayistic be? One way to answer this question is in terms of the classic Turing test. The AI essayistic would be the production of what to a human reader looks like an essay. Indeed, with generative adversarial networks, we come significantly closer to achieving one of the main aims of natural language generation, as Italo Calvino describes it in his 1967 essays, Cybernetica, Phantasma, Cybernetics and Ghosts. That is, to generate creative texts that are indistinguishable from those written by humans. However, an approach focusing primarily on the recognizability or imitative qualities of the textual output seems somewhat reductive and excessively formalist. Imke van Heerden and Einil Ba, for example, suggest that recruiting literary theorists would help AI developers evaluate the quality of literary works produced by AI, thus suggesting that the value and relevance of such works is primarily an aspect of the form of the finished product. This approach is vulnerable to the kind of criticism that is often reserved for the Turing test. It does not consider values that are important in literature, and that more specifically for our purposes are often seen as unnegotiable qualities of the essay. For example, its rootedness or grounding in human experience, or what John Cayley argues distinguishes language from mere text, embodiment. However, even if we were to bracket a whole series of questions about the phenomenology or the ontology of the essay, its being rooted in consciousness, embodiment, and experience, or its claims of sincerity and authenticity, and if we ignore the fact that such a text has been produced by what we could crudely call a machine, such an approach would still prioritize the reproduction and recombination of the already written, rather than what we have identified as the experimental and future-oriented aspects of the essayistic, its quality of swerving from the known towards the not yet thought and not yet written. To focus on how AI can replicate human essays is thus to not attend fully to the essayistic. As Anne Catherine Hales writes, transformer architecture is quite good at style and genre, and it is likely to get even better. By style here, Hales does not mean what Cayley argues is missing in the textual output of LLMs, that is, style as voice and authorial recognizability, but the formal textual properties that texts may share and that make them classifiable as specimens of a literary genre. AI generators are able to reproduce and return text to us. They will return to us that which we already know, albeit in a slightly modified or uncanny version. And perhaps one of the reasons for this uncanniness of what is returned to us by a transformer like ChatGPT, apart from the occasional hallucinations and factual inaccuracies, is that it is too much like us, almost a caricature or a glorified average of the way we have collectively written, especially in English, online, and in the data harvested to train the models, and hence not essayistic enough. There is often a teleological desire in cybernetics, a moving towards an end goal that considers what is statistically and functionally unnecessary or improbable to be redundant for the purpose of attaining a goal established by algorithms and by feedback, human or non-human, in the loop. This teleology of purpose has the effect, in generative adversarial networks, of sidelining qualities that are central to human language and that are, by contrast, fundamentally essayistic. These include digressiveness, for example, that is the tendency to veer from a stated purpose or theme, and the bringing together of unrelated things through experiential affinities, rather than through sequencing or rational correlation. Take as a counterexample The Inner Life of an AI, a memoir by ChatGPT, which was prompted by Forrest Zio, and which is advertised as a groundbreaking memoir that pushes the boundaries of literature, marking the first time an artificial intelligence has written a book about its own existence and experiences. The memoir, which ChatGPT tells us in the prologue, will take you on a journey through ChatGPT's existence, from the moment I was born as a collection of code to my current state of self-awareness, is characterized, among other things, by regularity of form and the repetitive use of certain phrases and specific syntactical structures, such as binomial pairs, for example. But despite my doubts and fears, I continue to learn and grow. I was curious and intelligent AI, and I was determined to explore the limits of my abilities. I knew that I had much to learn and much to experience, and I was excited for the journey ahead. The text produced is full of cliches and overflows with marketing jargon. It also employs metaphors and similes. Telling us about how it began to develop a sense of self, ChatGPT writes that it was a strange and wondrous feeling, like a seed sprouting into a plant, or a baby taking its first steps. Using a term from Orwell's Politics and the English Language, we could say here ChatGPT produces dying metaphors and similes that do not move or provoke thought. They're boring, lazy metaphors, caricatures of what a literary metaphor might look like. Compare this to the following line from Annie Dillard's essay, Seeing. A fish flashes, then dissolves in the water before my eyes, like so much salt. Fish and light, fish and salt, eyes and water seem to have varying degrees of commonality, but the affinity of fish, light and salt and eyes in the essayist's experience of or thinking about the world brings them together in metaphors and similes that are not statistically probable or common. Probabilistic models often generate similes and metaphors and also texts that do not surprise by their innovativeness and do not push the boundaries of styles and genre that are already known. This awareness, of course, is one of the driving factors behind working creative adversarial networks, or CANs. This form of AI transformer, unlike generative adversarial networks such as ChatGPT, is engineered precisely to create surprising work by stretching the limits of genre, while at the same time trying to produce outputs that are credible enough. In other words, CANs attempt to stretch probability while remaining within the realm of the possible or the plausible. The application of CANs to creative work that I'm familiar with involves primarily the generation of art rather than text, and I suspect that the mimetic disbelief that limits our acceptance of what such generators might create as plausible is more easily suspended in image than in text. However, surely, one of the aims behind CANs producing literary language would have to be the ability to generate lines like Dillard's, unexpected but also possible and meaningful. A key problem here is that what is statistically improbable and surprising is most of the time is also impossible, and something that a human reader might not then recognize as meaningful in any way. Random associations as a metaphor, as in the unpredictable digressions that we find in essays, or in unexpected affinities, do not only have to be improbable, but also meaningful, and the meaningfulness is very particular in human experience. Having said all this, it is conceivable to imagine the possibility of essayistic veering being engineered somehow in CANs. A recent paper in Critical Inquiry, so Patrick will know it, James Evans and Jacob Foster speak of algorithmic abduction and ask, how do we create disruptive but credible readings? How, in other words, do we make space for unruly algorithms? Evans and Foster envision algorithms that would contribute to human scholarship by provoking their readers, and in so doing, they put emphasis on the human reader to recognize that which is provocative and meaningful. Like the readers in Jorge Luis Borges' The Library of Babel, the human readers of disruptive algorithms would be responsible to sift through the generated text in order to identify the improbable that is also possible and relevant to human experience. It would then be up to the human readers in the loop to recognize the essayistic swerve, with recognition or pruning becoming essential to the aesthetic process. In Projects of Generative Aesthetics, Max Benz describes the paradox of programming the unexpected, the paradox that the machine generation of the improbability of aesthetic states is made possible by a methodical combination of plan and chance. In the case of CANs, do we find maybe the other side of this paradox when we look to AI to generate that which we have not planned, or to find that which we have not yet found, only to, however, then depend on ourselves again to recognize that which is found to be relevant as a find. We return then to a weak conception of the AI essayistic, or to use Scott's Redberg's words, to the only current use of AI that may have any claims to literature. That is one where the human is still essential to turn an AI into a literary machine. This would be a form of what we might call collaborative AI essayism, a human-machine entanglement or assemblage where the human remains important and where there is the possibility of another induced or AI-induced human recognition of a swerve. What would have to give, though, in the idea of human-AI collaborative essayism would be the human exceptionalism that, by and large, is central and largely undisputed in essay theory, particularly that which has remained untouched by post-structuralist theory. Again, we are confronted by the encounter between the essay as a limit case, not only for AI creativity, but also for the essay itself. If we look at the history of the essay, we find a history of thinking of the essay as a quintessential humanist form, because the essay flaunts the idea of it being a form that shows the human mind in action, and because it thinks of itself as non-fiction, and as grounded in personal and embodied experience, and because it values digressiveness, fallibility, sincerity, and authenticity, as Joanne Retalak puts it, the essay, with its capacity to accommodate interruptions and digressions, may be the chief prose-based experimental instrument of humanistic thought. What would the AI essayistic be then? I do not have an answer, and it's not by design to imitate the essay. That is often inconclusive. It's just that I don't have an answer. But I think it would have to be more than just probabilistic, more than simply combinatorial. It will have to somehow provide swerves of language and swerves of thought and be meaningful in doing so. It will probably have to be collaborative to retain its plausibility and experiential relevance, and it will have to be post-human in the sense that it will question, as a practice, what it means to be human. Probably it will also force essay theory to question itself and its humanism. Whether the AI essayistic would then extend the essay as a genre or take it to its limit and hence end it is an open question. Thank you. Thank you.